In this tutorial, we'll learn about the CSS box model, one of the most important concepts in CSS. Understanding the box model will help you control the size, spacing, and layout of elements on a web page. We'll explore the four main parts of the box model: content, padding, border, and margin. You'll learn how each part works, how they affect the overall size of an element, and how to use CSS properties to control them. By the end of this tutorial, you'll have a clear understanding of how browsers calculate the size and spacing of HTML elements, allowing you to create cleaner, more organized, and responsive web layouts. The CSS box model contains four main components that determine how an HTML element is displayed and how much space it takes up on a web page. These four components are content, padding, border, and margin. Starting from the inside and moving outward, the first component is content. The content is the actual information inside an element, such as text, images, videos, or other HTML elements. The second component is padding. Padding is the space between the content and the border. It creates extra space inside the element N, helps make the content easier to read. The third component is the border. The border surrounds the content and padding. We can customize the border by changing its color, width, and style. Finally, the fourth component is margin. Margin is the space outside the border. It creates distance between one element and other elements on the web page. So, the correct order of the CSS box model from the inside to the outside is content, padding, border, margin. Understanding these four components is essential for creating well-structured and properly spaced web pages using CSS. First, we'll create an HTML file that contains a div element with a class called box. This div will act as the main element that we'll use to demonstrate the CSS box model. We'll use this box as a visual example to clearly identify and understand each layer of the box model. Later, we'll add CSS styles to show the content, padding, border, and margin around the box. The class name box will make it easier for us to target this element in our CSS file and apply different styles to each part of the box model. This simple HTML structure will give us a clear starting point for understanding how the box model works. Next, we'll add some basic CSS styles to the body of our web page. These styles will help us control the overall appearance, spacing, and layout of the page. We'll set a font family to define how the text looks, and add a background color to give the page a clean and simple design. We'll also use properties such as display, justify content, and align items to control the positioning of the content. Finally, we'll define the height on margin to help create the desired page structure and spacing. These basic styles will provide a clean foundation for the rest of our CSS. Then, we'll define the styles for our box. We'll add a margin of 40px to create space around the element N, make the layout easier to see. Next, we'll use an outline with a thickness of 2px, a dash style, and a red color. The outline will help us visually identify the area around the box. We'll also set the outline offset to 10px, which creates additional space between the element's border and its outline. This makes the outline more visible and helps us understand how spacing works around an element. Next, we'll add a border to our box. We'll set the border to 10px solid orange, which gives the element a thick, clearly visible border. The 10px defines the border thickness, solid specifies the border style, and orange sets the border color. This will make the box easier to identify and help us clearly see the different areas surrounding the element. Next, we'll add 20px of padding to our box. Padding creates space inside the element, between its content and the border. We'll also set the background color to light green. This gives the box a clear visual appearance and makes the spacing inside the element easier to see. Finally, we'll style the content area of our box. We'll set its width to 200px to control the size of the content area. We'll also add a white background color, so that the content area is clearly visible against the surrounding styles. This will make it easier to understand how the different parts of the element are positioned and how they contribute to the overall size of the box. Lastly, we'll add text align, center to make sure that the text inside the box is aligned neatly in the center. We'll also add position, relative, which allows the box to be positioned relative to its normal position and gives us more control over where the elements inside the box are placed. Together, these properties help improve the overall layout and appearance of the box, making the content look more organized and visually appealing. To recap, the CSS box model is made up of four main parts: margin, border, padding, and content. The content is the actual text, image, or other information inside the element. Padding is the space between the content and the border, giving the content some room to breathe. The border surrounds the padding and content end can be styled with different colors, widths, and styles. Finally, margin is the space outside the border that separates the element from other elements on the page. Understanding these four parts makes it easier to control the spacing, size, and overall layout of a web page. To improve the design, we can add a header, an H2 heading, and a paragraph to make the content more organized and easier to read. We can also set the margin to 0 to remove the default spacing around these elements. This gives us better control over the layout and helps create a cleaner, more consistent design. For the label, we can set the font size to 10px to keep the text small and neat. We can use font weight, bold to make the label stand out, and text transform, uppercase to display all the letters in capital form. Finally, using display. Block makes the label take up the full width of its container and appear on its own line, helping keep the design organized. For the label, we can also add a red color to make it stand out more clearly. We can set the margin bottom to 5px to create a small amount of space between the label and the content below it. This helps improve the spacing and makes the overall design look cleaner and more organized. For the label, we can add padding to create some space inside the label, making it look less crowded. We can also set the color to dark green to give the label a clear and attractive appearance. Finally, adding a margin top of 10px creates space above the label, helping separate it from the elements before it and improving the overall layout. Let's look at our box model. We can adjust the width to change the size of the box and control how much horizontal space it takes up on the page. By changing the width, we can make the box smaller or larger depending on how we want our design to look. This helps us create a more balanced and organized layout. We can also change the padding size to adjust the amount of space between the content and the border of the box. Increasing the padding gives the content more room and makes the box look less crowded, while decreasing the padding brings the content closer to the border. This allows us to control the spacing inside the box and improve the overall design. We can also change the border of the box to control how it looks. We can change the border size to make it thicker or thinner, choose a solid or dash style, and change the border color to match our design. This gives us more control over the appearance of the box and helps make the design more visually appealing. The margin controls the space outside the border of the box. We can change the margin size to create more or less space between the box and other elements on the page. By adjusting the margin, we can control the position of the box and make the overall layout look more organized and balanced. So let's take a closer look at the developer tools and see how our box model works on the web page. When we inspect an element, Developer Tools allows us to see the different parts of the box model, including the content, padding, border, and margin. We can see how much space each part takes up and how it affects the overall size and position of the element. We can also change the values directly in Developer Tools, such as increasing the padding, changing the border size or color, or adjusting the margin. The changes will appear immediately on the web page, which makes it a very useful way to test different styles and understand how CSS affects our design. That concludes the tutorial on the CSS box model. We've learned about the four main parts of the box model: content, padding, border, and margin, and how each one affects the size, spacing, and appearance of an element. We also looked at how properties such as width, padding, border, and margin can be adjusted to change the layout and improve the design. Finally, we used developer tools to inspect the box model and see how these properties work in real time. Try it yourself and experiment with the different values to see how they change your box. This is a great way to practice and get comfortable with the CSS box model.